This is Nick Palizzi from The Sacred Science, and I'm here with Chris Killham, also known as the Medicine Hunter. Chris is a renowned ethnobotanist and a regular on the Dr. Oz show. He's considered an authority on the plant medicines of the Amazon, and he's also written 14 books on healing modalities from around the world. So Chris, for those listening that don't know a thing about ethnobotany, can you speak a little bit about what it is and the role it plays in the world of medicine?
Well, sure. Ethnobotany is basically the study of the relationship between cultures and plants. So in my work doing ethnobotanical research around the world, I might look at the relationship that people like, say, Brazilians have with a fruit like acai, or I might be looking at the relationship that Chinese harvesters in the far northwest of China have with rhodiola. Every time you've got a plant that people use, whether it's corn or tobacco or coffee or echinacea or whatever, you've got people working with that plant, and often there are strong cultural ties. So in my work, in studying plants from an ethnobotanical standpoint, I wind up working every bit as much with people and communities as I do with plants.
So it sounds like there's a lot of investigative work involved here. I guess.
Well, yeah, it is investigative. It's a matter of looking around, finding out who are these people, what's their culture like, what role does this plant play in their culture, is it important to them, does it matter, if so, how, why, what is it for them? I mean, you go to the South Pacific, for example, and kava, it's not just a plant that they grow and something they drink, it's central to their culture. It's as essential to their identity as possible. So understanding this helps you to work with the people and work with the plant.
So where do you get your leads from? And this is just a follow-up to that. Do you start with reading and finding out or getting little glimpses of a possibility of something interesting happening in a certain area of the world, or do you just get on the ground and start asking?
No, it can happen any number of ways, Nick. I mean, usually I know about plants that I want to investigate, and for me it's a matter of when can I get to it? When can I finally get to Indonesia to see the cinnamon plantations, or when can I get to such and such a place to see a certain thing? But often also people will tell me, they'll say, hey, do you know about the blue lotus, or do you know about this or that? And I might or I might not. And then I start looking around and gathering information and going, oh, wow, this is interesting. I ought to check that out. Or sometimes one of my clients, because I do this work for different companies, I'm not a trust fund kid, so I do this to make a living. One of my clients may say, hey, we'd like you to investigate a particular plant in West Africa. And I go, okay, that sounds great. I'd be happy to do that. So it really comes about by a number of different ways. Sometimes I'm in an area investigating something in particular. I get introduced to something else. Like recently I was in the Amazon and I was doing some work with cat's claw down there, which we can get into later. And somebody gave me a large bottle of Copa Iba oil, which I'd seen around for a long time, but it sort of stimulated my interest enough that I then just took more interest in it, and now I'm working with that oil for cosmetic purposes. So the leads can come from any number of directions, and it doesn't matter to me where they come from, as long as the plant is of value and the people are receptive to working together.
As you just mentioned, it seems like you spend a lot of your time down in the Amazon. Can you tell me why this region is such an area of focus?
Well, the Amazon rainforest, as I think most people know, Nick, it's the largest rainforest on Earth. It produces 20% of the world's oxygen. It holds more than 20% of the world's fresh water. Even though the wildlife is in grave danger and in very sad decline, it's still biodiverse, and there are a lot of medicinal plants down there, and there are still native people down there, although they've been whittled way, way, way down over the centuries. So I go there because I know shamans there from whom I've gained valuable information about medicinal plants, and with whom I've also engaged in ceremonial journeying with ayahuasca and San Pedro and other psychoactive plants. And I find the Amazon in general a relatively inexhaustible place in terms of a place where I can learn new things and find new plants. And I also have a very strong personal interest in the shamanic practices in the Peruvian Amazon, and even more specifically, the practices of the Shipibo native people. So I go down there 5-6 times a year and spend a couple of weeks down there, see friends that I've made down there, go to villages with which I'm familiar, or to villages that I've never been to, just depends, explore new rivers, and just try to figure out, okay, how can I do work here that will help the economy of these people, will help to preserve more rainforests, and also deliver valuable, beneficial botanicals to more people in other parts of the world. So it's something that I, just continue to do as often as I possibly can.
Sounds amazing. I'm with you. You mentioned ayahuasca. The medicine men that we work with, and some of them are Shipibo, they use these plant ceremonies not only to connect with their patients, but also to identify and locate, medicines that they need to be then prescribing to their patients. I was wondering, what role do the ceremonial practices of the Amazon play in your own work?
I have gone to shamans in the Amazon for personal healing. I go repetitively to journey in ayahuasca ceremonies and learn more. And I would say that the shamans with whom I've done this over the past years have been very helpful to me in terms of making connections with new groups of people, making connections with new villages. A number of these shamans have sort of vetted me and have said to people, okay, yeah, this guy's okay, you can work with him, you're not going to get ripped off. So I think they've actually been extraordinarily helpful from a personal healing standpoint, and also in terms of giving me entree into communities where people have every right to be concerned about being ripped off, because they have been for the last 500 years.
So in your view, medicinally, in the United States, do you feel that entheogens should be looked at again for their healing properties and possibly even incorporated into conventional medicine?
I do think that the entheogens, these spirit, manifesting plants of different kinds, have tremendous value and they have a lot to teach us. And I also think that they're not to be denied, despite tremendous repression, despite draconian laws, despite threat of imprisonment, despite incredible hounding on the part of heavily armed agents of all different sectors of law enforcement. People have continued to work with these plants, to use these plants, to study these plants, to investigate their healing powers. And I take that as a very clear sign that these plants are extremely important, and that's why this is taking place, as well as the fact that humans have an insatiable appetite for tinkering with their own minds, and these plants help us to do that. And so that's a force that's far greater than the legislative and legal forces that are at work against this category. But I also do think, in answer to the second part of your question, that these plants are being looked at by medical doctors, by psychiatrists, by people who have found certain limits to the therapies that they use, whether it's pharmaceutical drug treatment, whether it's surgical interventions or whatever. And they're finding with the psychoactive plants healing possibilities that they didn't suspect. I was down in the Amazon about 2 months ago, where I always meet people who've undergone remarkable healings. And I met a woman there who had suffered from horrible psoriasis all over her legs for 13 years. She went down to the Amazon, she stayed with some shamans, she regularly drank ayahuasca, she purged, she doesn't have psoriasis anymore. And for a person whose life was made agonizing and very limited for more than a decade by a disease like that, to be freed of it, that's extraordinary. That's something for people practicing medicine to take a good look at and say, wow, we don't have anything that cures psoriasis. What if this worked in many cases? That would be a tremendous boon to humanity.
For sure. So you've heard other people's accounts of these miraculous healings. Have you ever witnessed in your travels, not just in the Amazon, anywhere, in person, something that you would almost categorize as a miracle in terms of the sheer impossibility of it happening?
Well, my wife and I brought a couple down there, friends of ours. He is a very gifted musician, and he has been depressed his entire adult life and addicted to antidepressants. I mean, seriously, gravely, scarily addicted to antidepressant drugs for 30 years. We brought them down. We drank ayahuasca for a week. He came back, A, no longer depressed, and he hasn't been since, and that's over a year, and B, no longer addicted to antidepressant drugs. I call that a miracle.
Oof. I love stories like that.
The guy has a brand new life, and he's even more prolific than he has been as a musician, and even more creative than he has been, and he's happier than he's been in his adult life. And I think when you can have that kind of transformative experience, it's quite remarkable, and it deserves, rather than the kind of ridicule that the category of psychoactive plants has gotten so often from the conventional medical sector, I think it deserves close, thorough, careful examination.
Ayahuasca itself, it seems like it's got some very, very interesting healing properties, and I wanted to know if we could just go into a few of the entheogens and the other, visionary plants that are used down in the Amazon, and just talk about their preparation and, their applications.
Well, sure. I mean, do you want to start with ayahuasca?
Sure, that sounds great.
Well, ayahuasca is unusual in that it is the only combinatory psychoactive plant in the world. That is, it requires two plants to be made. It's a funny thing. A lot of people refer to the vine, Banisteriopsis caapi, also known as the vine of the soul, refer to the vine as ayahuasca. And many people think, oh, it's just the vine. But in fact, ayahuasca is that vine, Banisteriopsis caapi, and it's also typically a leaf called chacruna, which contains DMT. And what's curious about this, and this is where you kind of wind up falling into the deep well of plant spirit medicine, is that if you think about the Amazon, where you've got approximately 80,000 or so higher plants, maybe 10,000 vines, many of which look alike, and leafy plants that, thousands and thousands of them look the same. How did somebody figure out to take this particular vine, this particular leaf, pound the vine, take equal amounts of these, fill a great pot with them, add water, cook it down until you just have a little bit of goo at the bottom of the pot, and drink that stuff for visions? I mean, it certainly did not come about as a result of trial and error. The odds of that taking place are something insane, like 6 billion to 1. Now, the shamans will tell you very soberly that they learn this directly from the plants, that the plants teach them very much as, we might teach somebody a particular subject. So this is hard for a lot of people to swallow when they start hearing about this, plants talking to folks. But however it is that plants communicate with the shamans, they certainly seem to. So you've got this brew made basically by pretty much hard labor, Nick. An awful lot of vine, which is very fibrous and tough, almost like hemp rope, needs to be beaten until it's relatively soft and broken up and put in a pot. and then you cover that with a heavy layer of chacruna leaves, and then more vine and more leaves and more vine and more leaves. And once you get a great big monster pot full of this, you fill up all of the extra space with water, and you cook it for hours and hours and hours until it cooks way down, and you strain it, and then you continue to cook it, and eventually you get this thick syrupy goo at the bottom of the pot, and that's what you drink maybe an ounce or two of in ceremony to go on an ayahuasca journey and to experience the healing that's possible, which is why ayahuasca is called La Medicina, the medicine. It's also called La Purga because, as you well know, it makes people purge. It makes people vomit or have diarrhea or cry or exude a lot of sweat feet or the underarms. It gets rid of toxins and cleanses the body. And many people, there are explanations here. There's the chemical explanation. The chemical explanation is that the compounds in the vine close down a system that basically keeps us from tripping all the time, called the MAO system. And the DMT in the leaf goes directly to our receptors, and then we have visions. That's the chemical explanation. I think the broader explanation is that this whole brew works as a lock and key mechanism to open us up so that we're able to experience not just the dimensions with which we're familiar, but other dimensions as well, what you could refer to genuinely as the spirit landscape.
So in terms of applications, I know that the medicine men that we work with prescribe it for anybody to break their state, to eliminate some of the illusions before they go on the more subtle medicines. Do you have any empirical data on the applications for specific illnesses?
Well, I've spent time talking with both shamans and medical doctors who work with this, and it does seem that the so-called idiopathic diseases, or the diseases of unknown origin, are the ones that respond best to ayahuasca. We don't really know, for example, why people get psoriasis, but we know that they do. We know it's agonizing, and we know that there are no conventional treatments that eliminate psoriasis. But psoriasis responds well to ayahuasca. People who suffer from post-traumatic stress syndrome because they have been in wars like the Iraq War, or they have experienced childhood abuse or sexual abuse, they often undergo remarkable healings and become very highly functional instead of being mentally and emotionally and often physically disabled as a result of traumas. There are neurological conditions that respond very well. Fatigue responds very well. Grief responds very well. So it's clear that those disorders that have heavy emotional components as well as physical manifestations respond quite well to treatment with ayahuasca. And it's not just drinking a cup of brew, it's participating in a well-articulated, carefully crafted, specifically thought-out type of ceremony that is designed from the beginning to the end to induce healing.
You spoke a little bit about the chacruna leaf and how it teams up with the Banisteriopsis capi to make the ayahuasca brew. I'm sure you as well have seen medicine men add other leaves. I've seen a bunch of different types of plants added to the pot to induce certain effects during ceremony. One of them is a plant called toe. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about it, because Nicola from our film, who had Parkinson's disease, used it with some pretty substantial success. Just wanted to know what your take on this plant was.
Well, toe is the native name for Brugmansia. And Brugmansia looks like and is very similar to Datura, which a lot of people are familiar with. The plant contains a group of compounds known as the tropane alkaloids. They're very powerful, they're very dangerous, they're highly toxic. But as you may know, the difference between a medicine and a poison is the dose. I mean, if you take one aspirin, you can relieve a headache, but if you take 100 aspirins, you'll die. Toei has been used both to heal and also as an agent of murder, and that's entirely dependent on the dose. Some shamans put a small or moderate amount of toei, either the leaf of the plant or the blossom of the plant, into ayahuasca to boost the potency of the ayahuasca and to boost the power of the visions. And it does that quite well. What the shamans will tell you is that every plant has a spirit. And so for them, above and beyond what might be going on chemically, the fact that this plant has harma alkaloids or this plant has tropane alkaloids, there's the spirit of the plant itself. And what the shamans say is that they work with the spirits of the plants. So they don't really care one way or another if, a certain plant compound exists. They're focused on the spirits. And again, we may find that just too weird or hard to understand, but for them, this is their working reality. The spirit of Toei is very strong, and as an ally, it's used by shamans both in the Peruvian Amazon rainforest and also up in the Andes in ceremonies to effect healing. And again, we don't understand exactly how this works, but we know that it does, and that people do also have some remarkable healings as a result of taking Toei or Brugmansia.
You were talking about the plant spirits. It's something else that really interests me, because it really feels when you're in ceremonies that it's palpable, is the gender of the plant spirits. Like, ayahuasca is referred to as grandma. San Pedro I've heard referred to as grandfather.
Yeah.
Can you speak a little bit about plant genders and where that came from and how it can be used to your benefit if you are aware of these things?
Well, I think that everybody responds well to different things. Some people take great comfort in gender identification with the plants, and then they're able to create more of an emotional, mental, psychic bond with the plant based on identifying, this is like a grandmother to me, or this is like a grandfather. I mean, I personally don't happen to be one of those people, but I am surrounded by folks who do exactly that. And I think that the telling thing is that, we're familiar. I mean, I know what it's like to have a grandmother. I don't have one anymore, but I had two of them at one point. And that's a specific type of role that is unique and typically, highly treasured. I mean, unless the person just isn't kind. So it's easy to relate to a grandmother plant as being special and having your interests at heart. I, for example, experience ayahuasca as a psychedelic anaconda. This anaconda comes to me in ceremony, and it does things for me and with me and to me, and it shows up most ceremonies. And so, and frankly, I think it's male. At least that's the voice that it has. So I'm not having the grandmother experience, but I do think that gender identification for some people is very, very powerful and highly valuable. And I think that the beauty of these plants is that if you respond well to conversation, let's say, well, some of these plants will talk to you. If you respond very well to gender identification, I think the plants will appear to you in a manner that they have a gender. I think if you look at the visionary art that has come out of people's encounters, if you will, during ayahuasca ceremonies, some of it is very sort of angelic in that kind of New Age way. Some of it is very tribal looking. Some of it is very jungly. Some of it is totally different than all of that. I mean, it's really clear to me that the medicine is extremely flexible. And if you need to see angels, yeah, you're going to see angels. if you need to see anaconda, or if you need the plant to be a grandmother or whatever, that's how it's going to happen for you. And so I think that rather than the ayahuasca or any plant being any single thing, it is a vehicle for you to have experience, and some of your own frame of reference is naturally going to determine what experience you have. If you look at the visionary art of Pablo Amaringo, for example, his art shows a lot of traditional native activity that I never see in ayahuasca ceremonies. I never see that stuff. But those were his visions. That was the way he experienced the spirit world.
So, how much of this, in your opinion, do you believe is a divine sort of a spiritual presence, and how much of it do you think happens in your own imagination, in a sort of closed system that happens in your body and head?
I don't think it's door number one or door number two. I would say the answer to that question is yes. If you think about life the way Buddha described it, that everything is mind and everything is an expression of mind, and all events and circumstances and history, past, present, and future are manifestations of mind, then is it happening inside my little bone protected noggin, or is it happening in the greater universe, is a moot point, because the answer is only ever yes, it is. And people struggle with this. You know, people, for example, who don't believe that there's anything spiritual go absolutely bananas trying to figure this stuff out. You know, this all has to be a hallucination. And then, you know, you have shared visions with people in ceremony, and that pretty much throws that out the window. It's like, why is everybody all of a sudden in the whole room right now seeing snakes, and they weren't a half a minute ago? What happened? So the answer is yes. And the reason I say that is that in the ceremonial space, when you are in the thrall of the medicine, the rules are different. There's no gravity, for example. There's no time. I mean, you can have a difficult, painful thing that has dogged you your whole life, that has stood up against dozens or hundreds of hours of psychotherapy and hasn't been dented at all. And it can be absolutely eliminated from your existence in one night ceremony. And we don't know why. We do not know why that's so. But we know that the rules are different in that setting. And so in this particular sober day of light, you know, we're awake, we're talking on the phone kind of experience, is it inside your own mind, or is it, you know, divinity permeating the universe? These seem like almost sort of realistic divisions, but they don't exist in the ceremonial space.
How long do you think it's going to take for us up here in North America to start speaking about these plants in the mainstream media in a way that respects them and doesn't sensationalize them?
I think that the sensationalization of them is guaranteed, because the experiences are often so staggeringly sensational. I mean, you know, you can't be swallowed by a crystal skull one night and come back home and say, well, yes, you know, the medicine has very viable properties that I think should be studied by medical doctors. I mean, you know, let's get real. You know, you have like something like that happen, and it shakes your entire inner amusement park up all over the place. I do think that many people in the media have already approached this with dignity and respect. I mean, you know, I was amazed a few months ago. I mean, Bear Grylls drank ayahuasca and was really like positive and friendly and open-minded and curious. And we've seen Wade Davis do that on TV. We've seen a number of documentaries and specials and articles in National Geographic and a bunch of other magazines. I think this is already taking place, Nick. I think this is a very good time, for example, for your film, because you're showing possibilities that relate to the healing potential of this medicine and broader medicines, other things in the shaman's pharmacy, if you will, in their armamentarium of healing agents that are highly beneficial for humanity. So I think that the respect for the medicine in its media treatment is already taking place. And I personally believe that is due to the nature of the medicine itself. I mean, when I first started drinking ayahuasca many years ago and I came back home and I told people about it, the most stunning thing that occurred was that they listened with great curiosity and interest. They didn't turn off. They didn't go, man, you're a total fruitcake. What are you talking about? I mean, they listened, and I thought, that's the nature of the medicine. The authenticity, the dignity of it, the healing power of it coming through. And so while there's clearly sensationalization, I mean, we saw that recent movie with Jennifer Aniston that was actually a really kind of cute movie, but she's on ayahuasca and she's up in a tree thinking about jumping off because she believes she can fly. That's sort of the ridiculous, absurd Hollywoodization of it. But I think for the most part, the treatment has actually been pretty darn good, and that pleases and genuinely surprises me.
I love that response. It's unique. A lot of people are impatient. It sounds like you're in it for the marathon, not for the sprint.
Well, I'm also in the media. I mean, it's hard for people to swallow, but I'm on Fox News in 100 countries. I mean, I talk about ayahuasca on Fox, and I have about it, and I've been interviewed about it for Psychology Today and in other places, and I feel that I've been given very fair treatment and tremendous access to people to put this message out. And that tells me that times have changed from the panicky, totally psychoactive, plant-phobic 70s to now. It tells me that people are receptive and are looking for things that are outside of conventional medicine. It also tells me that people have tremendous hunger and curiosity for things that promise a spiritual experience. I mean, we saw with the Johns Hopkins University Medical Center study of psilocybin a few years ago that people who took psilocybin had one of the most meaningful experiences of their lives and one of the most meaningful spiritual experiences of their lives. And even 18 months later, when they were interviewed, they said the same thing. So I think that the time is right for this kind of healing. I anticipate that here in North America, more people will know about it, more people will do it, and the circle will just continue to grow, because I believe that the medicine itself is on a campaign to spread itself and is using us, I mean you and me and others we know, to get its message out. We're not the doers here. We're the servants. We're the porters. Every place I go around the world, when I meet with scientists or I meet with botanists, I always ask them the same question. I always stop and I say, tell me something. Are you working for the plants or are the plants working for you? And every last one of them, including the most sober in the lab scientist, has paused for a moment and then said, interesting question. I'm definitely working for the plants. Nobody has said the other. And I think that we intuit this. I think we know this to be so. I think they enlist us because we're able to do the job. We become their porters, their bearers, their proclaimers, their, the people who help to spread them. And we become part of their arc through human history and their campaign to heal, to open up people's minds, to spiritually enliven people, and hopefully to make the planet a better place to live.
I'm going to say, I want to talk about one more thing relating to ayahuasca, and then I want to move on.
Okay.
So the way it's been taught to me, and the way that I've sort of experienced it, there seems to be a serious element of death involved in the ayahuasca experience. Now, whether we're talking about, real death or just the death of certain parts of you, things that weren't serving you, but there is undeniably, in my experience, an embracing of death as being something that we need to respect and honor and not shy away from. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about how you've encountered different perceptions of death in different areas that you visited.
Okay, great loaded question. All spiritual activity, and certainly all use of psychoactive plants that are powerful, involves death of some sort. We have these very clever constructions that are our personalities, and they're basically really clever fabrications that we've assembled so that we can navigate through life. And some parts of our personalities and our perceptions work well, and some parts don't, but that's who we are. When we take these different substances, or when we engage in meditation or engage in rituals like the sun dance, we get basically somebody hits the ejector button in the cockpit and we get out of the seat. And all of a sudden we're in midair and we're not in familiar surroundings, and our sense of self is totally shaken up, and it is a death of sorts. And you see in native cultures around the world, and in meditative traditions, and in traditions where drumming or dancing or sacred ceremonial practices are used to urge people on into states of mind that are very, very different from the waking state with which we're so familiar, there's always a concept of death, because we have the experience of the construction of the who it is that we are being blown to pieces. And so, this is actually a common theme, not just with ayahuasca, but with all of the psychoactive plants, and for that matter, with all spiritual pursuits, culture to culture and history to history. And that's the scary thing, is you're sitting there, this stuff starts coming on, and you feel like you're going to blow apart and be obliterated. Guess what? You are going to, in fact, blow apart and be obliterated. That's why you drank the stuff in the first place.
So let me ask a follow-up question. Do you sense, being someone who's traveled to all the ends of the earth, or to most of the ends of the earth, that our perception of our own mortality here is a lot different, dare I say, a little bit more unhealthy here than it is in other places in the world?
Death is something that we try to keep at arm's length here. Often, children are not necessarily exposed to death. It is often the case that death isn't something that people are comfortable about, with talking about. But I think at the same time, differences in languages from one culture to another give richer or poorer ideas of death. But for everybody, it remains a mystery. I mean, we may say, well, I studied with Lama so-and-so, so I know that when we die, this happens. We don't know anything. We do not, we've got some very marvelously declarative, strong personalities out there telling us that this happens or that happens. The truth is, we don't know. And that's the part that makes people more uneasy and more uncomfortable than anything. It's the unknown. But that's what we're really living with. So yes, perhaps we have more of a sort of a weird or compartmentalized idea of death than, say, that they do in India, where they literally burn bodies in public. I mean, I've stood and watched a number of people just being burned, and it's really kind of peaceful and interesting to watch. But at the end of the day, everybody is wondering, well, when I lie down or whatever, when I finally do go out of here, what happens if anything does? And, we'll all find out, but we won't find out until we've died.
That's a great answer. So let's move up into the Andes. I'd love to talk a little bit about San Pedro. It's the other big ceremony that was featured in the film, and it's one of the other plants that I've got quite a bit of experience with, but I'd love to hear your take on its origins, the active ingredients in the cactus, and just the ceremonies that surround it.
Well, San Pedro is to the people of the Andes what peyote is to the native people of the Sonoran Desert in America, and that is in North America. San Pedro's active compound, if you will, is mescaline, which is the same thing that's in peyote. The difference is that peyote is not legal to purchase, sell, or use, and San Pedro you can buy in any garden store in any town. Dry per gram dry weight, San Pedro has either exactly the same amount of mescaline as peyote or slightly more. Mescaline, as we know, is a profoundly potent psychoactive substance. And in the Andes, which is a really rugged, vivid kind of lunar landscape, I've done a lot of work up there. The use of San Pedro is popular because the cactus grows absolutely everywhere. I mean, you can pretty much go down any road in the Andes and in a short period of time know that you're going to run into San Pedro. So, this particular cactus gets the quills taken off of it, it gets, chopped up and cooked down, and a concentrate of that is drunk, and it produces a pretty long-lasting experience, a psychoactive experience. And the shamans in the Andes use San Pedro for healing purposes, for teaching purposes, for diagnostic purposes, for spiritual journeying, for opening people up to greater states of consciousness and awareness and their own sense of integration and wholeness. And I think that while ayahuasca gets top billing because it is arguably more powerful than any of the other psychoactive plants, that's not to suggest that the other psychoactive plants aren't very powerful indeed. And I think that the healing virtues of San Pedro are such that it has been a staple in South American Andean culture for many, many centuries that we know of. It was one of the big plants that Richard Evans Schultes, talked about when he first got introduced to psychoactive plants. And I think that we will see a lot more about San Pedro over time because of its availability, its accessibility, its legal status, and its tremendous potency.
It's legal here in the States? I mean, it's legal to ingest here in the States?
Well, here's the crazy thing. I can go down to the Hadley Garden Center, which is down the street, and buy San Pedro and bring it home and put it in my kitchen. I don't think it's actually legal to drink this stuff. Buy it, I can sell it, I can walk over to my neighbors and say, hey, you want to buy this San Pedro cactus from me? I'm tired of it. And they go, yeah, I'll give you $10 for that. That's okay.
That's very funny. What are the practical applications, or are there any particular conditions that you would say concretely that it's good for?
Well, I haven't talked with as many people about their healings with San Pedro as I have with ayahuasca, but I have listened to a number of people talk about their healings with peyote, which delivers the same basic experience. And it's clear that it works really well with idiopathic disorders. There are veterans who have benefited, been able to overcome post-traumatic stress disorders, and people who've experienced different forms of abuse in their lives are able to do better. I think also, with San Pedro, as is the case with ayahuasca, people who are addicted to different things, either addicted to drugs or certain behaviors, are often healed. So I would say that it is one of the great, profound healers. I don't have the same depth of personal working experience that I have with ayahuasca, though I have used it and I am familiar with it. But I think that it does many of the things that ayahuasca does.
Very interesting. I guess to move away from the entheogens, I'd love to hear your 3 favorite Amazonian plants, or at least your 3 current favorite Amazonian plants, if you could.
Yeah, I think that once you step away from the psychoactive plants, I'm very, very interested in cat's claw, uña de gato, because it is a powerful anti-inflammatory. And inflammation is part and parcel of every chronic degenerative disease that exists, whether it's cardiovascular disease, arthritis, Alzheimer's disease. So when you can reduce inflammation, you can reduce the risk of various chronic degenerative disorders. So I think that cat's claw, which is also profoundly beneficial for the immune system, is actually one of the greatest medicines on earth. I have tremendous regard for it, have been using it for years, and on my website medicinehunter.com I talk a lot about cat's claw. Also in the Amazon you have dragon's blood, and dragon's blood is the latex of a tree. It is used topically for healing all different kinds of wounds, whether you're talking about cuts or burns or bites or stings or infections. It's referred to as sangre de drago or sangre de grado, and it is a very significant skin healing agent. Interestingly enough, I'm working now with cosmetic companies to put dragon's blood into different cosmetic products because it also causes the formation of new healthy skin, which makes it a kind of a youth enhancer. And then thirdly, I would say that I'm very interested in and am currently working with chuchuhuasi. And chuchuhuasi is the bark of a large Amazonian tree. It enhances energy, endurance, and stamina. It's a sexual libido booster. It helps to eliminate fatigue if people have been fatigued by stress or disease. It is a common tonic herb that is regularly consumed by a lot of people in the Amazon. So at this time, I think in addition to the entheogens, my top interests are cat's claw, the anti-inflammatory immune-enhancing vine, dragon's blood, the skin-enhancing latex that looks like red blood and comes from a tree, and chuchuhuasi, the tree bark and the preparations made from it that fight fatigue and help to eliminate pain and help to give you energy and stamina. We have a tremendous pharmacy down there in the Amazon rainforest.
So just one quick follow-up. For the uña de gato, what is your preferred method of preparation?
Well, for convenience at home, I take capsules of standardized extracts of uña de gato, but I also use fluid extracts. I have a friend who has an herbal extraction company, and he'll sometimes send me a really thick, dark, syrupy extract of uña de gato, and I'll take a spoonful of that or a part of a spoonful of that. You know, it's a great detoxifying agent. It helps to eliminate poisons from the body. So I'll take it in a variety of different ways.
So, like you said before, there's over 80,000 species of plants in the Amazon. 3%, I believe, was the number that you and I spoke about a few days ago. 3% have been studied in some way, shape, or form.
Right.
So there's got to be a few that you have your eye on that you wouldn't say for sure are the next big cure, but do you have any that you would feel comfortable sharing with us that you're looking into right now that haven't been identified yet or really brought forth yet?
You know, all of the plants that I'm currently working with, I would describe as part of that 3%, Nick. I mean, there's still a lot of plants. I'm constantly being introduced, you know, there's this curious vine called Rainikia that yields a beautiful, luxurious, very fine oil, and that's of fascination to me. Oddly enough, the fruit, Huito, Juniper americana, which is a non-edible trash fruit, yields a black dye that I think may be very good to introduce to the hair coloring industry, and it would be a tremendous economic boon to the native people because this stuff is all over the place. So I'm looking at different things, some of which are not necessarily for internal health or the prevention of disease, but may just be for beauty. You know, I'm working with a variety of different plants down there. Sometimes people tell me they've got something that's a treatment for cancer, and I may have to go investigate things like this for years. So there are plants that I don't really want to talk about at this point, but I do always have my eye on the future. You're right about that.
It's interesting. During all of our screenings at film festivals, one common question comes up. It's probably the only slightly negative question that comes up about our film. And that question is, yes, the film is, interesting, and yes, it does provide some hope, but are we helping or are we hurting these cultures by bringing mainstream attention to their healing secrets?
Well, that's a pretty easy one to answer. I mean, when you consider that by 1615, 4 million native people in the Amazon were already dead from the slave trade, it is naive to imagine that we're even vaguely among the first people to have an impact on culture down there. There is almost no intact native culture in the entire Amazon, but for a very, very few limited number of people who are the so-called uncontacted tribes.
Mm-hmm.
Basically the native people, I mean, you go down to a shaman, that shaman also has a TV in his or her house, is wearing drawstring shorts and flip-flops and has an iPhone and a baseball cap, and maybe their kid plays not Nintendo. The world is not what it was down there. And what I believe is that this particular interest that people have now in shamanic practice is reviving shamanism where it was dying out. People saw no future in shamanism. They saw a future in becoming taxi drivers in the cities. Now they go, well, gee, my dad's a shaman and he's been asking me if I want to apprentice, and I see that I could have a good life and stay in my community and make a living, and it's possible now, and I'd like to do that. So I think, in fact, that while it is admittedly somewhat of a two-edged sword, you've got more people going down to the Amazon than ever before because they want to drink ayahuasca. At the same time, I think this may be one of the things that does help to an extent with some cultural and environmental preservation. So again, it's not really an either or equation, it's more of a yes.
What you're speaking about sounds so much like, it's almost a perfect caricature of two of the people in the film, Edwin, who's one of the shamans, and his son Christian, who was kind of brought up in a technologically advanced part of Iquitos, but now has decided to leave for the woods to work with his father because it's something that is getting to be more respected.
Right. And the good news is when they want to go into the city and, go have a smoothie and get a new pair of sneakers, they can, but they can also remain in their home area and they can do traditional work and they can be respected and they can earn a living, and they don't have to leave their community, and they don't have to be just another disenfranchised native people on the ropes in some rapidly growing faceless city. I think there are compelling advantages to that. Whatever the Amazon was before contact, it is not now. So the question is, can we, through these activities of inquiry and participation, which the people down there for the most part are welcoming, can we help to preserve some of the good things about those environments and the culture? And I think the answer is a resounding yes.
Are there specific operations that are exporting herbs and other things out of that region that you feel are doing the right thing in terms of giving back to those communities?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I really like Leslie Taylor's company, Rain Tree Nutrition. I think she's been doing good things with native people in the Amazon for a long time and representing the plants and the culture very well. And her sympathies are beautiful and sweet and really humane. I do work down there for a huge French company called NatureX, and I'm the person who, basically sets up the deals and the treatment of the native people. And we do a lot of, work down there. So I'd say we're doing a good job. I think that there are, in fact, a number of people working down there trying to do it right, just as there are plenty of people down there that are just ripping the native people off wholesale and taking what they can while it exists. So it's very much a mixed bag right now, Nick.
How many of the herbs that you and I have discussed, aside from the entheogens, of course, how much of these 3% would you say are available here in the States?
Well, I think that if you count up all of the different beneficial Amazonian forest products you can get, you probably realistically can't find more than about 100 or so of them in the States. But if we can boost demand even for just 100 plants, I mean, I have good friends who work in the acai business in Brazil, and they've been able to preserve a lot of rainforest and put about 15,000 families to work and invest in a town where they have a manufacturing facility, and lots of products and services have sprung up there, so people are now making good livings with ancillary businesses that support the acai trade. So I think that if we can boost the demand for some of the good sustainably produced forest products, even if it is only 100 of them or so, this can have very, very far-reaching positive consequences for both the economies of the native people in the villages there and for preservation of parcels of the rainforest that'll otherwise just be cut down for timber or burned down for charcoal.
Through the films we've made and are going to continue to make, I think we have a lot of the same ideals as these companies that are doing the right thing. I think we're trying to bring awareness to the more selfish reasons, as bad as that sounds, for us to preserve these cultures and these regions of the planet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just to kind of finish up here, I take it as very positive that so many people are interested in going down there and having an experience with shamans. And people may go down for a variety of reasons, but once they're in a ceremonial setting and they've swallowed the ayahuasca and they're sitting on their mat, they're going to have their journey. And I do believe that a lot of people come back from there with a realization of the great importance of protecting that environment and greater respect for indigenous native people. And if we get a few folks out of that, steady tide of people moving back and forth who act on those feelings and sentiments and work for cultural and environmental preservation, then I consider it a real net gain and something, highly, highly worthwhile.
I completely agree with you. The next place we're going is Siberia, so I think we might have to touch base with you again. I know that you've done a lot of work there, and we might need to pick your brain about the best places to go and the things to watch out for.
Yeah, for sure. Don't go in winter.
For sure.
I've done that. Siberian winter is just so unnecessary.
Chris, it's been amazing talking to you.
Yeah, it's been a great pleasure, Nick. Thank you so much. I wish you great success with your film, and I'll look forward to hearing more about your work as time goes on.
I love it. Likewise.
Take care.